Coming up on the Q30 Newscast, we explain the story about why we're all in separate rooms and not in our studio. Plus, today is Election Day. With Americans voting in droves across the country, we follow with special coverage of our own. And with the election, there is much to learn about both nearby in Hamden and across the nation. All this and more on the Q30 Newscast. Hello and welcome to the Q30 Newscast Election Day special. My name is Luca Triant, coming to you from an on-campus quarantine dorm. But it's not just me who's ended up in this situation. The entire newscast has moved from the studio to quarantine this week. But how did we all get there? Kate Pattyfoot has more on this story and the experiences that we've all faced in isolation so far.
My name's Kate Pattyfoot. I'm the news director for Q30 News, and last Thursday I tested positive.
I did everything I possibly could to avoid coronavirus, and I still ended up in the quarantine dorms. You really can never be so sure.
I was really nervous. I was really scared. I didn't really know what to think. All I knew were the horror stories that I've heard about COVID and what could happen. Like, people are dying from it, and I honestly thought, I was like, what if I die?
My mom drove up as soon as I called her to drive 3 hours to come get me. I packed up my stuff.
I called the student health services. I told them about the situation. I explained everything, and they told that I was low risk. I could quarantine in my dorm.
A call from a school physician telling me, based on the information I told her, that I could go to urgent care and get a test so I would not have to stay in the dorms. As I got halfway to my car, I received another email saying I am contact traced and I need to report to Maine by 3:30. It was 2:00, and I had to pack 14 days worth of stuff, but the thing was I had absolutely no laundry.
One of the most difficult things that I had to reckon with coming home and getting the call to quarantine was that I had no idea if, when, or where I would be tested, let alone if I would test negative. And yet I was going home, walking through my door and exposing my family and the people I love the most to this horrible and terrifying virus.
Because I'm also a student athlete and have a whole team to worry about, I immediately told my coaches about this and decided with them, as well as with my parents, that for me it was better to go home and quarantine.
After talking to a lot of the other members who were there at the newscast that day, they told me they were asked to arrive to the quarantine dorms on the main campus, and I was so confused that I never got that email. And that's when it clicked that I forgot to add myself on the contact tracing list that we usually have at the Q30 Media Suite.
When it comes to contact tracing on campus, it could be from a friend or roommate that you know very well, or you could be called to quarantine and your safety in question because of someone you passed on the quad or stood behind in line at a food truck for Spud's potatoes.
I was so stressed out that when I finally began walking to the parking garage with all my stuff, I started having an anxiety attack. I couldn't breathe, and then I got in my head thinking I couldn't breathe because shortness of breath is a symptom of coronavirus.
I called the student health services again, and I told them my situation, and I said that I want to volunteer to quarantine myself because I was afraid that I could potentially give it to everyone else in my suite. And so once I said that, the student health service, like the nurse who was talking to me, she seemed so unsure about it. She sounded like she didn't want me to quarantine. But after much convincing on my part, she told me that she assigned me a quarantine dorm, and that's how I landed here.
Not much outside time at all. No choice in food, really. Lack of drinks. And, usually we would be able to go to the cafeteria and get whatever we want. But now we're just kind of limited in that respect.
Started worrying about everyone I came in contact with the day before for my tap practice and how many people from other departments of Q30 showed up to the show on Wednesday.
I mean, the communication between us and the people running this program definitely needs to improve. We've tried to contact them at least 4 times per one response that we get, which is not acceptable.
My roommates kind of thought that they could get it, just, I guess, easily. But it's really not like that. That's why there's so many social distancing things in place. That's why you have to wear your mask.
I've not been checked up on, which really concerns me because I have been closest with Kay on Wednesday. If anyone were to contract coronavirus, I really think it would be me.
Just our biggest fear is the fact that we're not getting tested in here. So if we make it to the end of the 2 weeks we're supposed to be in here, 12 days or whatever it is, obviously our hopes are getting high and we're looking forward to getting out of this little room. And then it comes out that, one of us tested positive, and that probably means we have to spend another week or two in here.
I was tested Monday. I'm currently waiting on results, and being at home has been different.
Everyone kind of panicked, and I feel like a lot of this panic just comes from like being misinformed and not having a real understanding of COVID-19 and of the virus. And so thank God my mom works for the health department because she was able to really educate me, because I too was a little confused on everything. I think people really think this is a joke. It's really serious. For 3 days I really could not taste or smell, and I wasn't eating because I couldn't do those things. So when people are wearing masks and when they're social distancing and when they say not to party and not to be in crowds, they really mean it, because it's not something to play with.
And suffice to say that it's been a roller coaster ride this past week, but news never stops.
This past Wednesday, there were 19 new cases within the Quinnipiac community. There are 45 students in isolation. 29 of those students are off campus and 16 are on campus. Because of this, there will be an increase in sample testing. Also, new rapid testing for students with symptoms. These test results are expected to be available within 15 minutes. More deep cleanings in residence halls and isolating cases and clusters through contact tracing. All this information was sent to your Quinnipiac email on October 30th. The town of Hampton, along with the state, has implemented Phase 2, which means more restrictions on social gatherings.
I'm standing outside of K.T. Murphy Elementary School, or voting district number 3 for today, where many Stamford residents have come throughout the morning to cast their vote for the 2020 election. I was able to cast my vote this morning, and afterwards, I spoke to a couple of Stamford residents about their post-voting thoughts. The polls opened as early as 6 a.m., and Stamford voters have been in and out of the building all throughout the day. For many people, this election season has brought up a lot of mixed feelings and are now worried of what's to come next.
Pretty nervous. Obviously, this country is going to need a lot of change in order to progress better, but I'm hopeful that if we choose the right person for the job, then we'll be able to turn it back in no time. So that's all we can hope for now, and then let's hope this doesn't go into another catastrophe or more people to get hurt, because that's not what we need right now.
Meanwhile, another Stamford resident was in high spirits after casting his vote.
Oh, I feel great.
You feel great?
Absolutely. America first. Very important election. Clear choice between socialism and America.
Rudy Karukas, a resident and volunteer for the polling site, said she felt a general good energy.
It's been very uplifting. I can see the enthusiasm of people here to vote. You can tell lots of people in the neighborhood are excited about their local candidate because he lives in the neighborhood. There's just a general good energy that I haven't seen in recent elections. There's just a vibe.
Just a reminder that all voting polls in Connecticut are open tonight until 8 p.m. in case you haven't gotten a chance to go out and cast your vote. Reporting for Q30 News, I'm Jennifer Cuevas. Now let's dive into our politics report with Cassidy Berger. Cassidy?
Thanks, Jen. It's Election Day here in the U.S., and Q30 News is ready to bring all the latest updates from the polls. First, let's look at the voting numbers here in Connecticut. Connecticut's Secretary of State Denise Merrill said on Friday that Connecticut hit a record number of voter registrations. On Friday, that number was 2.3 million. Keep in mind that Connecticut has a population of just over 3.5 million people. Over 600,000 Connecticut residents voted before Election Day alone, with many more expected on the day itself. Yesterday, November 2nd, both President Trump and former Vice President Biden spent the day in key battleground states in their 11th hour pitches to voters. Both candidates had busy campaign days. President Trump visited Fayetteville, North Carolina, Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Traverse City, Michigan. Meanwhile, former Vice President Biden spent time in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Monica, Pennsylvania. Both candidates urged their supporters to head to the polls. The presidential line is not the only race to be watching tonight. All across the country, governors have had to make difficult decisions regarding the coronavirus pandemic. Now, those decisions are heavily influencing gubernatorial campaigns. There are only 11 states with gubernatorial races this year. and only 3 are expected to be competitive. Those 3 states are Montana, Missouri, and North Carolina. Across the board, the pandemic has rocked states' economies and governors' approval ratings. Montana, however, is unique. Its current governor, Steve Bullock, is limited by term and is leaving to run for the U.S. Senate. The open seat will surely be a toss-up tonight. That's all I have for today's political update. Stay with Q30 News for the latest election news. I'm Cassidy Berger, sending it over to Skylar Haynes.
While voter turnout and civic engagement levels are certainly up, people are also feeling an increase in election stress and the effect that the uncertainty and tense discussions are having on their mental health.
I feel like everyone has the weight of the world on their shoulders right now.
I really am unsure how long it's going to be before we know who wins the election and how politically charged the environment is nowadays. I'm afraid people are going to start taking sides on who won, who didn't, and it could eventually get into like a violent situation type of thing.
We have a highly contentious, very odd election happening during a pandemic, during a time when nothing is normal. And I think that we can't separate those two things.
I'm very nervous for the results of the election because I know that whoever wins, either way, there's going to be a huge impact on my life.
Election night will look different this year, and whether you stood in line to vote today or had already sent your ballot in, the uncertainty of what happens next is certainly looming.
It feels like it's just a never-ending cycle of I don't know. And I understand that we have to take it day by day, and like there's some things that you just have to take day by day, but sometimes like you just want to know the answer. You just want to know that everything's going to be okay.
I think we have to take a step back and say, I'm not the only one feeling uncertain. I'm not the only one, and it's okay to have these feelings.
While these feelings may be overwhelming, taking simple, small steps for self-care in the next few days is critical for many.
Just taking a moment to breathe, and it might sound silly or kitschy, but when you stop, full stop, and you actually pay attention to your breath and be intentional with it, you're not worried about what just happened. You're not thinking about what is going to happen. You're taking care of your body in the moment.
It's going to be a long process, and being kind to ourselves and being patient, I think, and to each other, to our students, I think that's going to be really key.
Being kind to yourself is really the most important piece. And if you're not taking the time to make time for yourself, then none of the rest of it even matters.
More than 3,000 high schoolers voted in Connecticut's mock election this year for high school students. 3,056 students voted from 48 different school districts virtually. 43 districts voted in majority for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. 3 districts voted for President Donald Trump and Mike Pence, while 2 districts had a tie. With these results, the hope is that every youth who is 18 years old and older is exercising their right to vote today.
With time, and especially within the last few years, it is progressively becoming harder to express your political opinions with family and friends. I talked to the presidents of Quinnipiac College of Republicans and QU Democrats to see how their clubs give students the opportunity to have these conversations with peers. After 4 years under the Trump administration, students are finding it harder to have conversations involving politics. Quinnipiac student organizations like Quinnipiac College of Republicans and QU Democrats both provide that safe space for students feeling uncomfortable speaking about their choices and beliefs. Joining one of these organizations on campus helps students learn more about each political party.
I feel like people need to be educated. They need to grow up in a sense on their own. I feel like a lot of kids our age kind of just tend to believe what their parents believe.
More often than not, students who fear speaking out about their beliefs are the ones who share different views than their families.
You might live in a household that doesn't agree with you. I know a lot of our members, some of their families don't necessarily agree with them politically, so we like to have our club be kind of a place where people could come and talk about these issues without feeling judged or discouraged.
Both presidents say that the younger generation's lack of education in politics leads to the stronger divide amongst people.
It helps you understand more where the political parties are coming from. I know some of my members aren't even registered Democrats. They just want to know more.
Clubs often band together to mutually speak on a tragic event that impacts the country or use their platforms to hold civil debates.
Between the two orgs, the Democrats and the Republicans, we do host an annual event each school year where we host a debate between the two organizations to kind of foster that political conversation.
The clubs, along with the Political Science Association, teamed up to advocate for students to register to vote this past fall. Depending on the outcome of the election, both clubs will continue providing inclusivity and a free space to allow students to exercise their freedom of speech and expression. I am Hannah for Q30 News. And now we have a national news update from Grace McGuire. Grace?
Thanks, Hannah. There's a lot going on in national news this week, so let's get right into it. As COVID-19 cases surge in the U.S., hospitals have been struck with a shortage of nursing staff. Hospitals in Michigan are reportedly operating at about 5 nurses short of optimal levels at a given time. Each nurse is typically expected to care for 4 coronavirus patients. This shortage of nursing staff is worse than at the beginning of the pandemic, as the surge in cases is not only in certain urban hotspots, but all across the country. Because of this, there are competing starting wages for nurses, as nursing demands have reportedly doubled since March. There is contention about the status of Dr. Anthony Fauci's job that hinges on the election's results. President Donald Trump has reportedly suggested he would fire Fauci a few days after the election, as he is unhappy with the coronavirus's second wave. His supporters at a campaign rally in Florida started the chant, "Fire Fauci." Former Vice President Joe Biden said in response, quote, "We need a president who actually listens to experts like Dr. Fauci." Since Fauci is not a presidential appointee, neither politician could directly fire him, though. U.S. manufacturing is reportedly at the highest level it has been in 2 years, despite the surge in coronavirus cases. The manufacturing index increased by 3.9 percentage points during the month of October to bring it to 59.3%. As any reading above 50 signals an expansion in manufacturing, this is finally a change for the better, as the numbers have recovered from a brief recession when the coronavirus first began. This gain reflects increases in employment and inventories nationwide. That's all I have for national news this week. Back to you, Habzibah.
Thank you, Grace. Today's results will decide the 46th president that this country will see, yet another male. In honor of America's first South African VP candidate, I spoke to women in leadership roles at Quinnipiac to find out what it is to be a woman in fields that are largely male-dominated. Some students felt that almost always the insults they received in their professional environments were indirect, and women have to work much harder to prove their worth.
A lot of the times it's just men who think women are in it for the guys and for the cute boys, and it's like, no, we're in it because we want to be in this profession and we want to use our voices and do what we love without any judgment.
We have to come more forceful, more prepared, leave no stone unturned, and really be thorough about our preparation, because if we don't, the tiniest slip as a female, especially going into politics or law, just knocks you down way further than it would your male counterparts.
Kamala Harris is the first woman of color to be nominated as vice president on a major party ticket. President Olian felt that anyone in such a position was definitely a role model.
Person who provides you with a vision of what you could be, and you can relate to that vision, is a role model and is encouraging. That's why we want more representativeness, more people of color, more students of color, more faculty of color, more staff of color to be role models to others, because they show the way. They show that you can be that person.
Some of the female leaders had advice for women who wish to be future leaders.
Don't look at your gender or your skin color as a barrier to success. Think of it as something that makes you stand out and use that to your advantage.
First and foremost piece of advice that goes without saying is to excel at what you're doing, because never have any reason that people could say to you that you are less than excellent. And so that's a minimum but insufficient requirement.
Reporting for Q30 News, I'm Habzibah Rajan. And next, Vanessa will give us an update on international news. Vanessa?
Thanks for tuning in to International News this week. We have a lot to cover, so let's get right into it. As political tensions rise in Thailand, Thai people have not been happy with their current situation. Student-led protests have been ongoing since July in an effort to demand a new constitution in which King Vajiralongkorn must obey, the dissolution of parliament, and the resignation of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. Amid these protests, when the king was asked about compromising with the Thai people, he replied, quote, "Thailand is a land of compromise," end quote. This was the first time the king had spoken to foreign media since 1979. Therefore, progress may be on the way. Similar to these tensions, the people in Belarus are protesting against their long-standing president, Alexander Lukashenko, for the 13th Sunday in a row. President Lukashenko has maintained a tight grip of power over Belarus as he enters his sixth term of presidency. Despite the police countering protests with water cannons, stun grenades, rubber bullets, and mass detentions, up to 20,000 people took part in the rally on capital streets this past Sunday. Police continue to detain protesters and journalists, with numbers skyrocketing up to 15,000 people detained since the presidential election in the beginning of August 2020. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson just announced a 4-week lockdown last Saturday that is predicted to last until December 2nd. The purpose of this lockdown is to slow down the spread of the virus. However, the reopening after this time period is not guaranteed. Under these new restrictions, restaurants and bars can only do takeout. Non-essential shops must close, including gyms and hairdressers, and schools, however, are allowed to remain open. Johnson emphasizes the dire need for this lockdown, saying, quote, "Unless we act, we could see deaths in this country running at several thousand a day," end quote. That's all I have for today. Come back next week to find out more on the Q30 Newscast.
Thank you, Vanessa. And with that, we are out of time. The special newscast is over, but we will be back at our usual time next Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. But until then, don't forget to keep up with all of our content across Q30 by going to our website at q30tv.com and by following us at Q30 News on Twitter and Facebook. Also, don't forget to download our new mobile app on the App Store. For myself and everyone who is on today and the people behind the scenes, I bid you good day, safe times, and we'll see you next week, Bobcats.